Hello and welcome to the Author's Den, where you'll meet authors and hear them talk about writing, publishing, and distributing their work. On today's show, we meet Ron David, author of But I Never Met Sinatra. Hello and welcome to the Author's Den. With me today is our special guest, Ron David. Ron, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Mike, for having me.
I was really looking forward to talking with you today. You've had a really interesting career. It involves television, advertising, and a lot of famous people. We're going to talk a little bit about your book, But I Never Met Sinatra. But first, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where were you born and what was growing up like for you?
Well, I was born in northwest Detroit. When it was brand new, we still had pheasants and rabbits running around the backyard. And it was a lovely place to live. And Detroit was a thriving, wonderful city. And I've always been a Detroiter and love Detroit. I've been to a lot of cities around the world, actually, and I like Detroit and Michigan very much.
Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. What did your parents do, and what was it like growing up?
Well, my father was a radio TV personality, Toby David. He was also Captain Jolly, which was probably the highest rated local TV show in Detroit for many years. He was the morning drive time disc jockey at CKLW Radio in Windsor. He and Fred Wolf at WXYZ Radio were the J.P. McCarthy and Dick Purton of their day in Detroit radio. Unfortunately, my mother and he divorced when I was about 3 years old, and I didn't really get to know him until I graduated from high school.
Talk to me more about who raised you and what was that like?
Well, my mother raised me, and my grandmother and grandfather and uncles and aunts, and my mother was married a couple of times along the way besides my father. But I had a stable environment and was well cared for the whole time and enjoyed life pretty much.
Well, it's interesting that you didn't spend a lot of time in your early years with your father, who was in the industry, but you ended up being in the industry. Talk to me about how that came about.
Well, my father worked in Detroit for a long time, and then he left Detroit to go to Washington, D.C. for a while. He then went to New York City and did a lot of radio and TV in New York City, and ended up coming back to CKLW Radio and TV here in Detroit to finish his 30-year career in the business. And when I graduated from high school, he called me out of the blue and said, let's have lunch, and we did. And he said, what would you like to do in life? And oddly enough, even though I didn't know him, I said, I want to be in broadcasting. So a week later, he got me an interview at Channel 7, WXYZ TV in Detroit. It didn't work out too well. If you read the book, there's a funny chapter on how that first interview worked out. I didn't get the job to begin with, but I did a couple of smart things that got me the job eventually.
Yeah, and I thought that was very interesting. You know, tell us what happened.
Well, I was dressed in the only suit I had, which was a gray flannel, tunnel belt, peg pants suit. It was the uniform of the day in high school. I had the duck's tail haircut, and I looked like a typical high school kid, you know, because I was a senior in high school. And they took one look at me with the square-toed shoes and all that, and they decided that I was not pretty level-headed, and that they told me there was no job available. And I knew that there was, because that's why my dad got the interview for me. I was really crushed. So when I went home, I did one of the few smart things I've done in my life. I wrote both the station manager and the general manager thank you notes for their time. And they realized that I had a little head on my shoulders and that I wasn't what I looked like. And the next week they called me and hired me, and I started at WXYZ TV at 17 years of age. But the pay scale wasn't very good to start with. Today it's far better. We did have to belong to a union in those days to work, and I did belong to the Radio Television Directors Guild, which is now the Directors Guild of America. I have an honorable withdrawal card in that union. However, if I activated it by paying 1 month's dues, I could direct a feature film, I could direct a television network show or a local TV show with that card.
Talk about your first job at Channel 7 and how your career changed, what skills and jobs you took on.
I really had never been in a studio before in my life, and so they made me what they call an ET man, electrical transcription. Basically what I did was I played the theme music for shows, and I played the audio track for some of the commercials that used slides and film strip at the time. After about 3 or 4 months of that, I got promoted to stage manager, floor manager, which is being in charge of everything that happens in the studio. And through a happenstance where I got a chance to fill in for a missing director, I directed a live TV show at age 20 and became a full producer director at Channel 7 at age 20, and I'm probably the youngest person to ever be a full producer director in America.
Who was the talent at that time, and what shows were you doing?
Probably the biggest name was a local guy named Soupy Sales, who went on to bigger and better things. Soupy had a noontime comics show, he called it, which was aimed at children. And children would come home from school, have lunch with Soupy, and go back to school. And he was a great hit with the noontime comics show. And then he had a nighttime show called Soupy's On, which I directed. But Soupy came here from Cleveland, and his real name was Milton Suppman. He became a big hit in Detroit with both the noontime comics and the nighttime show. Went on to California, where it was an instant success. His big gimmick was throwing a pie in people's faces. And believe it or not, when he was out in Hollywood, people of the ilk of Frank Sinatra, Burt Lancaster, people of that ilk couldn't wait to get on his show to get that pie in the face thing. Ultimately, they found out that he wasn't quite as funny as they thought he was, so he ended up going to New York City, and he pulled a very big prank in New York City. He was on television there early in the morning, and on one New Year's Eve morning, he looked into the camera and told the kids, he said, you know, I bet Mommy and Daddy are still sleeping because last night was New Year's Eve. He said, why don't you go in the bedroom and see if Dad's pants are on a chair there and see if he has some green paper in his pocket. If so, mail it to me, Soupy Sales, here, care of ABC TV in New York. Thousands and thousands of dollars came in, and he had to donate it all to charity to save his job. But that was Soupy Sales, and he's a very colorful guy.
And I seem to recall some of the players that I've known over the years saying that they performed on Soupy's show. Is that possible? Can you talk about the evening show?
Well, back in the 50s, when I started in television, Detroit was one of the most important cities in America for the record business. Detroit, Boston, and a couple of other cities were make or break for any record that ever got released. As a result, every recording artist in the country would come to Detroit to do not only the Soupy show, but we had a disc jockey here named Ed McKenzie, who was one of the top 10 disc jockeys in America, and he had a 2-hour live show which I worked on Saturday afternoon called the Ed McKenzie Saturday Dance Party. And they all came in. I worked with people like Peggy Lee, Sammy Davis Jr., Oscar Peterson, Errol Garner. I mean, the list just went on and on. Anybody who was anybody in the business came into Detroit to do Soupy's nighttime show or the Ed McKenzie Saturday Dance Party.
You know, it sounds to me like Detroit and Michigan's been your home base throughout your career, but I know that when I read the book, you talked about going to Hollywood and New York and Chicago. Talk about some of the projects that took you out of the state.
For a long period of time, I was Vice President of Marketing for Big Boy Restaurants. I was on the National Ad Committee for Big Boy Restaurants of America. And we filmed a lot of commercials in Hollywood for Big Boy and the Big Boy restaurants around the country. For the last 13 years of my career, I handled all of the Cadillac dealers in Detroit, Michigan, Ohio, and West Virginia. I did their advertising. And I shot a lot of commercials for Cadillac out in California. During that time, I've won a Clio Award and about 12 or 13 other national and international awards for excellence in writing, directing, and producing. Working in Hollywood is quite an experience because if there ever was a town where unions were strong, it's Hollywood. They don't work on weekends, and it's very expensive to shoot commercials in Hollywood.
You know, we keep talking about TV equipment and technical director, but the more I talked to you and when I read your book, it seemed to me that you really wore a few different hats. You approved copy, you wrote material? Talk some more about that.
Well, I wrote a lot of commercials along the way. For Cadillac, I can say that I did a commercial called Bigger, which was for the Cadillac Brougham, which was back when they had the big monster cars. And at that time, Brougham was outselling all of Lincoln Division. One model of Cadillac was outselling all of Lincoln Division, but sales had begun slipping. So the Cadillac people said, we need to do something to help the Brougham. So I did this commercial out in Hollywood called Bigger. That was such a success that I had done it for the Detroit Cadillac Dealers Association. But Cadillac liked the commercial so much that they put it on the Masters Golf Tournament on CBS coast to coast 7 times in one weekend, which is a great honor for me, of course. It saved the Brougham. The Brougham stayed around for another 4 or 5 years as a result of that commercial.
What did you actually do for that commercial?
I wrote it.
No, when you
And produced
and
it.
it was shot in Hollywood?
It was, yes, I wrote and produced it and shot it in Hollywood.
So what was your working relationship like with the people there? What did you do exactly?
You hire a production company if you're going to shoot a commercial. You rent the sound stage or the location or whatever. And so I took them out to California and we shot the Bigger commercial and several others. Whenever we went out there, we'd shoot a package of commercials to make the trip more affordable. We'd do several commercials at one time. And having written the commercial for Bigger and several of the other commercials, and I was also the agency producer on the thing. So I worked with their producer for the production company and their director, and we worked together to get the project accomplished.
As you're talking and as I read the book, it seemed like the car companies and Big Boy were your really big accounts. Are there any other unusual clients that you might have had that stand out?
Well, I had Verner's Ginger Ale. It was one of my accounts. I did Michigan National Bank, which is no longer Michigan National Bank. It's merged with, I think, Comerica or something. Worked on Kowalski Sausage Company, Aury Bakery, the Detroit Free Press, a whole lot of local accounts and stuff. In the ad business, you end up working for a lot of different clients, and you have to assimilate and learn their business very quickly to be successful. You have to be a quick study.
What were some of the more unusual campaigns that you might have been a part of?
Well, I think the most interesting thing that I was able to accomplish was while I was Vice President of Marketing for Big Boy Restaurants here in Michigan. Everybody was weight conscious and diet conscious and all that sort of thing, and Florine Mark was the local representative for Weight Watchers International. She was probably one of the most successful area directors for Weight Watchers in the country. So I called her one day and said, you know, I'd like to become associated with Weight Watchers with the Big Boy Restaurants. So she arranged a meeting in New York where Weight Watchers headquarters is. I flew to New York with Freddie Elias Jr. And met for an afternoon with the Weight Watchers people, showed them our menu, told them about our company and the fact that we had our own testing kitchen and laboratory and commissary and warehouse and all that sort of thing. We shook hands and we went to work on creating the first and only authorized Weight Watchers restaurant menu. And for several years, Big Boy Restaurants was the only restaurant chain in the country to have a full authorized Weight Watchers menu where all the Weight Watchers members could come in, order off the Weight Watchers menu, and stay within the Weight Watchers program.
Yeah,
so
sure.
that was kind of an interesting...
You know, if I'm not mistaken, was there an Elias Brothers before Big Boys, or how does that work?
Well, I was really involved because I handled the Elias Brothers Big Boy Restaurants when I was just a rookie advertising guy. Another ad agency in town had the account, and I happened to meet one of the brother-in-laws of the Elias Brothers at a party, and he got me an interview with the 3 Elias Brothers, John, Fred, and Lou. At the time, they had about 35 restaurants in Detroit, and I eventually convinced them to let our agency handle their advertising. While I was doing that, I met Bob Wyan, who was the originator of Big Boy. He started Big Boy out in Glendale, California, back in the early 50s. And what happened is he had a little diner with just a counter and the little backless seats, you know. and sold hamburgers and milkshakes and coffee and pie like everybody else. And he had some musicians who used to come in every night to his place and after their gig and have a bite to eat. And one night they said, "Bob, why don't you do something different? We're tired of the same old thing all the time." So he went in back and the light bulb went on. He put a half another bun, another patty. He put some, actually I thought it was Thousand Island dressing, but they call it a secret recipe thing, and some lettuce. Brought out the first double-deck hamburger. The band loved it, and that's how Big Boy began.
The Elias Brothers and Big Boys were the same company?
Well, what happened is Bob Wyan, who was a very genuine guy, I've met him several times. He was a multimillionaire, but he would wash out his own socks and underwear in the hotel where he was staying. Very down-to-earth guy. Knew nothing about franchising. And there was an outfit in Ohio called Frisch's who stole his idea. They had a boy running with a paper cap and an apron on. And so Bob Wyan went to his attorneys and said, "What can I do to stop these Frisch's is stealing my entire idea that I have with Big Boy Restaurants?" And they told him, "You got to go interstate." Well, Bob Wyan had met the Elias Brothers at restaurant conventions, and they were at a restaurant convention, and he told them the story. And he said to the brothers, "If you will become a franchisee, I will give you the city of Detroit for $1 a year for the rest of your lives." They said, "Let us sleep on it." And they stayed up all night talking about it, came down for breakfast the next morning and said, "Give us the state of Michigan for $1 a year and you got a deal." They shook on it. Bob Wyan took Frisch's to court, and they had to become a franchisee. And so at the same time, Elias Brothers became a franchisee, and that's how Bob Wyan kind of saved his empire.
Mm-hmm. And we know how big that is, too.
It was later brought out by Marriott Corporation, and now it's owned solely by what was Elias Brothers' Big Boy, a fellow who owned Gillette Broadcasting. Saved Big Boy from going under, and it's doing very well right now.
Well, you've really had such a diverse career. Let's just talk right about the book for a few minutes. Sure. You know, it looks like a labor of love. Tell me, why did you write the book? How did it come about?
Well, I was privileged to have a 47-year career in broadcasting and advertising, and during that time, I was able to work with many, many famous people throughout the years, all of whom were wonderful to work with. And I just felt that I should tell the story, not as an autobiography, but just to people know a lot of the names of the people I work with, and I thought they would find it interesting to see some stories I had not read in the magazines and newspapers about these people. So I thought about it for several years and finally sat down and started writing the book, and it just came out right in order, no editing except for punctuation and spelling.
So is the book something that you've done by yourself?
Yes, I self-published it. I don't know if most people know it, but in America today, 80% of all books that are published are self-published. Unless you're John Grisham or Bill Clinton, no publisher is going to take a chance on an unknown author. So I found a company who helped me put the book together, to design the cover, to pick the typefaces and all that sort of thing, to get the book in the form that you'd want to publish it. And I paid for all that and got it self-published. I have since gotten into Barnes and Nobles and a lot of the other book chains. I've done a lot of in-person book signings, probably 50 or 60 of them. I do a lot of work for charity. I'm very much involved with the Recording for the Blind and Dyslexic, which is a national organization. I'm on the board of directors here in Detroit, in Michigan. And I have done a lot of book signings for them with civic groups like the Lions Clubs and the Rotary and Kiwanis, where any books that I sell at those meetings, I donate a portion of the proceeds of the sale to Recording for the Blind and Dyslexic. So I've given them a lot of money, and I've sold some books and had a lot of fun.
If someone wanted to find out about your book or purchase it, where could they go to find it?
Well, some of the Barnes & Noble still have copies of the book. The distributor that I had, I hate to say, didn't do a very good job for me, and that often is the case with self-published authors. So I was kind of on my own, but I formed a company called Caron Press, C-A-R-O-N, Caron Press. It's right here in Rochester Hills, and if people will call 248-299-4408, we can see that a signed copy of the book gets to you at your convenience. So I'd love to do that. We have some copies left, and if people would like to read more about the book, they can call that phone number, 248-299-4408, and we'll see that the book gets to you, signed by me.
Okay. You rub shoulders with a lot of different people, and that's kind of what you reminisce about. And part of what I thought was interesting in the book was that we get to see maybe a slide of some of the celebrities that we might not be aware of. Can you talk about a couple of your encounters and what was special about them?
Well, the very first chapter in the book tells about how I came to meet Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau out in Hollywood. As I had mentioned, you don't work on the weekends because of the unions, and we had gone out to dinner at a place called Cafe Swiss. And I walked into the restaurant with this group of people I was with, who was sitting at the table number one, the head table, but Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, Mathau's son, who was the spitting image of him, and some lady who I didn't know who it was, just a friend of theirs, I guess. Well, they seated us toward the back of the restaurant, but I was in a position where I could see the table still. Next thing I knew, I was in the restroom, and who was I standing right next to except Jack Lemmon? And I said to him, I'm so pleased to see that you and Walter Matthau are friends in real life, because I've loved the work that you've done. And he said, oh yes, well, it happened that Matthau had just had heart bypass surgery, and I knew about that. And I said, how's he doing? Well, Jack Lemmon just couldn't tell me enough about how worried he had been about Walter and how well he was doing. And I mentioned to Jack that I had been a TV director, that I had seen him do on the network the TV version of The Entertainer, which had been done for the big silver screen by Sir Laurence Olivier. And I said, you know, on the big screen, Jack, you're powerful, as all actors can be on the big silver screen, but when they put it on the diminutive little TV set, the performance loses a lot of punch. But I want to tell you that I think that your performance in that particular show was just as powerful as it would be on the big silver screen. Well, we were lifelong friends from that moment on. We talked for another 20 minutes. I went back to the table. My friend said to me, where have you been? I said, well, I was in the John talking to Jack Lemmon. And they said, oh yeah, sure, nobody believed me, you know. Well, we got up to leave finally, and as we went out the door, Jack Lemmon, who was still there with Walter Matthau, jumped up and said, oh, Ron, stop for a second. I want you to meet Walter. And he brought me back over to the table, introduced me to Walter Matthau, his son, and this friend of theirs. My friends that were with me, you just couldn't believe it. They about dropped in their tracks. But that's the kind of guy he was. Another story was Bob Hope with his wife Delores. I was at TV2 at the time as creative director and promotion manager, and Jack LeGoff was the anchor man of Channel 2 News at the time. The Michigan State Fair was on, and Bob Hope had been signed up to do the entertaining at the show, be the headliner for the State Fair. And Jack LeGoff was asked to be the MC for that show. So the station asked me to take Jack out there, make sure that he got taken care of and all that. Long and short of it is I got to wait in Bob Hope's dressing room till he and his wife Delores showed up with a local TV, radio, film critic called Shirley Eder. I don't know if you remember her, but she knew the Hopes very well, and so I got to meet them all. Then it was time for showtime. So they put us in some seats at the side of the stage, which was a huge stage, and there were thousands of people in the audience that night. And it was a typical September evening in Michigan, kind of chilly. And I'm sitting next to Delores and Shirley Eder, and Bob's doing his show. And Delores turned to me and said, Ron, you know, it's kind of chilly. I'm afraid Bob will catch cold. Would you take my shawl and put it on his shoulders? And I said, Delores, Bob's doing his show right now. I'm not going to interrupt him during his show. She said, oh, please do it for me. I'm afraid he's going to catch cold. So I decided to make a bit out of it. So I got on the stairs going up on the big stage, and I held the shawl up so everybody in the audience could see it. Bob Hope was oblivious to me. He was 20 feet away on the stage. So I exaggeratedly tiptoed across the stage, walked up to him, slipped the shawl over his shoulders, and patted him on the back and said into the microphone, "Bob, your wife Delores thinks that an old man like you in this Michigan cold weather better have a shawl on so you don't catch pneumonia." Well, the audience went nuts, you know, they were laughing their heads off. And I just started to walk away. And he said, "We'll buy furniture tomorrow." He was that quick and ad lib, you know, and the crowd really went nuts at that point. But you see, it's like I said, the bigger they are, the nicer they are. Joan Rivers is another one that I had the opportunity to work with and do a couple of commercials with out in Hollywood. I was in her home in Brentwood. I met her husband and her daughter Melissa, who she's now working on cable TV with every day, and she's now full grown. She was just a little girl at the time. Joan Rivers had just made her movie Rabbit Test, which she produced and directed herself and used her own money to produce the film. She had to hock her house. Her father had to hock his house. They put every dime they had in making this movie. Luckily for her, the movie was a hit and she made a lot of money with it, got all of her investment back. But she was the easiest person I ever worked with. We did 2 commercials in a half a day with her, when normally it would take a couple of days to do a couple of commercials. And I said to her when we were all done, "Joan, you were just a joy to work with." She said, "Listen, dear, ever since I directed that movie and saw what a film crew and production company could do to me, I'm very cooperative with everybody I work with." And she had learned her lesson, and it came out to my benefit.
I bet you have so many stories, and I know if people buy the book, they'll get a chance to hear more of this.
There's so many others. There's Phil Donahue, there's Eleanor Roosevelt. The list just goes on and on of people that I've had the pleasure to get to know pretty well, and some very unusual stories about some of them.
Well, Ron, I really appreciate you taking the time to come here and be on the show today. I would like to ask you, though, if you look back over your career, you've done so many different things. You've worn so many different hats, from technical director, producer, writer. What brought you the most joy?
Well, I used to kid that I couldn't keep a job because I did change jobs very often in my career, but I never was out of work one day in my whole 47 years. And most of the time when I changed jobs, it was because people came to me and asked me to work for them. But the most exciting thing is that I loved everything that I was doing, whether I was a producer director at a local TV station or producing and writing commercials out in Hollywood or New York or Chicago with Oprah Winfrey Studios and so on. I loved every day of it. I couldn't wait to get to work, and what a fortunate man. They say that if you don't like work, pick the thing you like the most and you'll never work a day in your life, and that's about what happened to me.
Well, I know that you're promoting the book now. How are you spending your time other than that?
I'm retired, and I have been for about 10 years, but I've been busier than I was when I was working, believe it or not. I mentioned earlier that I am very much involved with recording for the blind and dyslexic. The reason I am so enamored with that charity, that nonprofit, is because you can give to a lot of the charities that are out there who are looking for cures for some horrible diseases, and keep giving and keep working and so on, and nothing happens. With Recording for the Blind and Dyslexic, I know that every day, thousands of students here in Michigan and across the country are getting their education when they wouldn't otherwise because of what we do at Recording for the Blind and Dyslexic. So I spend a lot of hours fundraising and on the board of directors, and I'm a volunteer reader as well for the organization. And then I play the piano, I'm on the computer, I play in a golf league, I bowl in a golf league, in a bowling league, excuse me. And my wife is working part-time, she's younger than me, so I'm Mr. Mom. I cook dinner every night, I do the grocery shopping, I do some laundry. I'm very busy, and I'm enjoying every bit of my retirement, believe me.
Ron, thanks so much for being with us today. I'm really looking forward to going back through the book now after talking with you and becoming more familiar with some of the stars that you rub shoulders with. Thanks so much for your time, and good luck with your book.
Thank you, Mike, very much. I enjoy being here.